Hello, welcome everyone to FISD's webinar from the Alternative Data Council on getting data to flow. We are thrilled to have you here and we have an incredible roster of experts to talk. So I'm Tracy Schumpert, the Director of Member Relations at FISD. I will just be kicking things off with a few administrative issues and then we'll dive right in. So firstly, we could not do this webinar series or our live events without our incredible sponsors. So I would like to thank AWS Financial Services, SIBO, S&P Global Market Intelligence, Tradition Data, and Exignite. I would also like to thank Google Cloud and Refinitiv. Thank you so much, guys. FISD is for those of you who are not familiar, is a nonprofit professional association focused on financial information. We're a membership organization. We've sort of been involved in alternative data in a big way for the last couple of years, and we have quite a few new members who have joined both FISD and the Alternative Data Council effort, and you can see their names here. If you are interested in joining the Alternative Data Council and FISD, please shoot me an email and I'll be happy to talk to you. Now, a few admin pieces. Like many of your organizations, our parent company, SIA, has an antitrust compliance policy. We don't need to get into that too much here, but just formally, I would like to say, please abide by antitrust law. Finally, this webinar is being recorded, but we do ask any media not to quote people or without their permission. In general, we consider this webinar to be off the record. If you would like to be involved with FISD or the council through any media, social media, you are welcome to do so, and that information is there. Again, email me if you have any questions about this. Now I'd like to turn things over to our webinar Master of Ceremonies, Elizabeth Pritchard. She is the founder of White Rock Data Solutions and has come aboard at FISD to help us with our go-to-market activities around the alternative data standards, including this webinar series. So thank you, Liz, and handing over to you.
Thank you, Tracy. Welcome to today's webinar. We are going to examine how to get the data to flow. Our goal is to speed up, to remove impediments from the process of onboarding alternative data so that the time from data to insights to action is faster. It may seem odd to be discussing standards, which can sound like constraints on the process. It sounds like maybe the standards will actually impede the flow of data, won't they? Actually, standards are a good thing. They enable innovation. Right? They can seem constraining as we are constantly being influenced to value the new and the different, to be innovative. So it may come as a surprise to learn that the standard, the shared and the common, can be strong drivers of transformation. In fact, many of the innovations that have changed the world, including railroads, modern manufacturing and interchangeable parts, containerized shipping, they all succeed because of standardization. And in finance, we have a history of successful standards facilitating interoperability, such as messaging standards, the FIX protocol, SWIFT, Fedwire, and XBRL, to name a few. All of these have enabled progress. We have a terrific lineup of topics and speakers today to address the standards work of the Alternative Data Council and their impact on getting the data to flow. Our agenda is packed, and we're going to lead off with two keynote speakers from the buy side who will be followed by a panel of data vendor experts. Everyone you will hear from today is passionate about leveraging data to drive business outcomes, and each leader brings their unique perspective and experience to their discussion of the standards today. Let's begin by warming up with an audience poll, and then we'll get going with our first speaker. Okay, this one is for everyone to answer. What is the primary objective for bringing in alternative data sets? Is it search for alpha, risk management, cost reduction, or something else? We'll give you a few seconds or so to answer the question. The results are in, and it looks like finding the alpha by a large margin, right? I guess we're not surprised. as given the challenging markets we are facing and how funds are looking for unique ways to gain an edge in this time of uncertainty, especially with the health crisis and the economic crisis before us. Okay, this is a really nice tee up for our first keynote speaker, who is scanning the horizon for interesting data to fuel strategies at his firm. I'd like to introduce Norman Niemer, who is the Chief Data Scientist at UBS Asset Management, representing the QED team. Norman, why don't you set the stage for us and describe how data science is creating the demand for data and the standards. Over to you, Norm.
Great, yes. All right, thank you, Liz. So I am super excited to have so many of you here today to learn more about the work that we're doing on the Alternative Data Council. Getting standards like this off the ground is never easy, and I'm super excited about the traction that we're having, and I hope we can continue that. So as Liz said, you know, we started really this effort because we saw the need for it, and for us on the QD team at UBS, the mandate is very similar to what a lot of the people mentioned in the poll is that search for alpha, and our mandate is to really work with fundamental analysts, provide them with data-driven insights such that we can make better investment decisions on behalf of our clients. It's a very collaborative effort that sort of aims to combine the best of human and machine decision-making. But you know, and there's a lot of opportunity, but the sad reality is that we're spending so much time with really basic stuff that's really kind of preventing us to do the work that we're supposed to be doing in the first place, which is use that data for alpha generation and better investment decisions. A lot of times we get stuck in sort of long vendor presentations where it's not clear what the use case is. We're having to look through very badly documented data sets to just kind of sift through and figure out like how we can use this within our firm and things like that. So the goal of the council is to make this better for everyone and to be able to you know, turn the opportunities of alternative data into reality, but in such a way that it's cost effective for our clients, and that the sort of, you know, the teachers, firefighters, entrepreneurs, and executives who are investors in sort of all of our products don't ultimately bear the cost for that efficiency. We also want to facilitate the growth of alternative data, obviously, and drive adoption of alternative data in the investment process. I think we're still in the early innings of where we can go with this, and I'm really excited to kind of see how we can use this council and use these standards to achieve those goals. One of the things that I think is really important too is to do this in an ethical way. I don't think any of us kind of wants to see alternative data go the way of the expert networks. And so one of the sort of important bits of this effort has been sort of the legal and compliance aspects of that, and you'll hear about that soon. So who's supporting these standards now? We've got 30 buy-side firms that are representing trillions of dollars in under asset management. You can see there's the leading asset managers and hedge funds are involved in this effort, but also a number of smaller ones, and we can all benefit from that. We've got 10 or so more vendors involved at this point that are sort of have been really leading the charge, including Sequentum being one of them, as well as the other people on the vendor panel later on today. And I think that now that we sort of produced a number of things that people can practically use, we're hoping to grow that number through this webinar series that Liz has been organizing here. We've also got one data sourcing platform who is all in on supporting the standards, that's Ego Alpha, and so they're making their platform fully compatible with these standards, which is really, really amazing to see, and has been already beneficial to myself, as you'll hear later on. so practically speaking, what can you get out of our work? That all sounds great, but whatever we produce that you can actually use in your daily work. So we've produced 3 tools, if you will, that you can already actively use. And today we're going to cover the data vendor tear sheet in more detail. We've also published a due diligence questionnaire, which has been super useful for us to kind of get the right legal and compliance sign-offs when we're using alternative data. We've got a nice checklist for data buyers, which to me has been really useful to introduce myself to data vendors and sort of explain to them what we do, and so they can present the best solutions to us. What's coming soon down the pipe is web data collection standards. So that's one of the most commonly used alternative data sets. So we're trying to be thought leaders here. There's also more legislation coming out around that. So we want to be self-regulated as an industry and sort of be ahead of what the regulators might be thinking about and sort of do everything in an ethical way. We're going to be working on providing REST API standards, which is going to be helpful, again, for vendors and buyers to reduce the time working with REST APIs that'll go along with a data dictionary, which helps us explain what the data is about, buyside guide, which explains new vendors on how to best sort of sell data to this audience, and then we're working towards a trial agreement. So all of this is the important thing too. All of this is freely available to the broader industry. If you want to be a member of the council, you have to be an FISD member, but to use any of this work, it is completely free and open and free to use. So where can you get this? The easiest way is to either Google Alternative Data Council and you get to the SII FISD website. You can also just Google Alternative Data Standards, and that'll get you there as well. And you'll get to a page. I think we're going to cover this later on the webinar. Tracy's going to show you sort of what that looks like, but all these publications are, again, freely available on there, free to use. So as promised, today we're going to talk about the vendor tear sheet. So that's designed to accelerate the data evaluation process for a data buyer. But it's also, I mean, for me, it's been super useful to efficiently, if I'm at an Eager Alpha conference or if I'm talking to a vendor for the first time, this is a really, really efficient way for me to understand what this data set's about. For vendor, it's a great template for you to describe your offerings in a way that makes sense to the data buyers in the investment community. And to really kind of drive home the point of why this is so efficient. So on the Eager Alpha platform, there's 1,200 data sets available. Typically, a vendor wants to do a 30-minute intro call with me to kind of explain to me how the data set works and all that stuff. And so if I did nothing but that, if I did nothing but those 30-minute intro meetings with vendors, I would spend 77 days just going through those 1,200 data sets. So I probably wouldn't get a lot of other work done, let alone actually kind of progressing with some of them and generating those business insights that we're supposed to be doing. The tear sheet for me has been able to get that 30 minutes down for the very first call from 30 minutes to about 5 minutes. So that to me is 83% of the time saved, and that's made this really, really efficient for me and sort of in a practical use case. And this is sort of the very first step of the process. And as you can see, you're already saving a lot of time right there and then to kind of just make sure whatever the vendor is providing is something that is of relevance to us today. One kind of real use case that I had for this was one practical use case was Eagle Alpha put together a summary of all the vendors that have data around COVID, and they used the tear sheet templates to describe each of those vendors And that's been really good for me to kind of go through this as efficiently as possible, as I mentioned, but it's also giving me a lot of good qualitative insights around sort of where a vendor is at. And so if, you know, if you're asking for a 100-character summary of your data set and people are writing a 2-page summary, or they don't fill in half of the fields, including the ones around point-in-time data, which is really important. That's kind of telling me a lot, and so that's been really helpful to me sort of throughout this time that we're going through right now within COVID.
We do want to take an audience question. Thank you, Norm. You've made some really interesting points about the benefits of the standards, specifically how the vendor tear sheet can save you a lot of time. And you're a super busy guy, and that is really important. And it's also terrific to see the collective wisdom from firms collaborating across the industry, and how you know, you're coming together to deliver some really terrific guidance and tools for use by everyone for free. So that's fantastic. And so we do have some audience questions coming in. Why don't we take one now? Norm, let's direct this to you. Here's a question. Don't the standards level the playing field? Do the standards remove the competitive advantage from asset managers who have invested in sourcing teams and are really experts at working efficiently with some of the newer data vendors?
Yeah, that's interesting. That was one of the questions I get asked a lot, both from the buyer, so the data buyer, as well as the vendors. It's sort of, you know, aren't we just sort of leveling the playing field here? And maybe in some ways, yes. And that was one of my big worries when we sort of started this effort is like, you know, what's really in it for the big funds? And I was, as you can tell by the firms that are involved in this effort, the answer is no. And I can tell, I can speak for myself. There's, like I said, you know, these things are so basic. This is not something that I would talk about to our clients, you know, in an investor presentation, that, hey, we can ingest CSV files faster than everybody else. What you want to tell is a story around how you can leverage this data to make investment insights. That's ultimately what matters. And so the ability to get together as an industry and say, hey, let's just get the basic things out of the way so we can start doing the work that we're actually supposed to be doing, where we can create sort of unique insights for our clients. That's what we should be focusing on. And I think if you know, if you spend a lot of time and money to build sort of the data ingestion layer, that's not something I think that an asset manager should do. That's the business model of somebody else. But it would cost a lot of time and money that, again, that end client ultimately has to bear. So that's kind of my view. From a data vendor's perspective, it's a similar thing. Even if you kind of get the most basic things out of the way, there's still so much work that's required to provide a quality data offering that is reliable and generates insights, that you can easily just do the most basic things within the standards that doesn't cut into any of your competitive advantages. So that's my personal view on that.
Thank you, Norm.
If anybody else from Shruti or somebody else, if you guys want to chime in, like feel free, and maybe we'll leave that for Q&A. But I think that's definitely a crucial question. But you, as I said, for just judging by how many people are interested in supporting this, I think the answer is there's plenty left to do.
Awesome. Thank you, Norm. I mean, the basic good practices, what we hear you saying, the basic good practices defined in the standards actually make it more efficient for everyone, and the innovation can happen much more quickly. Super. Okay. Well, while Shruti's getting ready, let's do another poll. This one is for data buyers to answer. Okay. On average, data buyers, how long does it take to onboard a new data set? From the start, so your initial meeting with the data vendor, to the time the data is used to make an investment or trading decision? Is it pretty short, 1 to 3 months, 3 to 6, 6 to 12 months, or longer than a year? Have we gotten faster, or are we still taking a long time? Okay, look, 3 to 6 months. It sounds like we're getting faster. The last time I polled an audience with this question, it was in the 6 to 12 month range. So hurrah, we are getting faster.
Thank you, COVID.
Yeah. So
getting us in faster and standards.
Right?
Thank you, COVID and standards.
A crisis brings the creativity. That's fantastic. Okay, well, let's move on to our next speaker. Shruti Thakur is well positioned to shed some light on these results and to describe how she is making a difference and working to speed up this process. To be more in the know about what the experts are doing, we'll now hear from a data buyer who is the head of Alpha Trawler and vendor data for active equities at BlackRock. Shruti, over to you to share your views with us. Take it away.
Thanks, Liz, and thanks everyone for joining this webinar today. I think to echo what Norman said previously as well, putting these standards in has really helped everyone I've talked to on both sides of the equation. But what are these standards? So looking at the data vendor tear sheet, wanted to break it down a little bit further for you. First of all, the data dictionary. All of the vendors on here must have heard this a million times. What's your data dictionary? And what the data dictionary gives us is a shorthand way of seeing the data points that are covered, the way that you're approaching the data, and the structure of the data, as well as the format, i.e., what kind of data structure do we have to have on our side to ingest it. The next section of it is technical. Now, technical is in two ways. One is the format of the files, where they're based, how do we pull them, but also the other side of the delivery method. We use Google Cloud at BlackRock for alternative data and active equities, but a lot of vendors use different cloud systems. Some vendors still use FTP. So before I start engaging, I need to know if I've got the ability to bring that data in. The format is really important. And then the state of the data on delivery. Is it going to be mapped? Is it just incredibly raw and we just pull it in and do everything ourselves? How big is each file going to be, and how many files of that size are we expecting, both for the trial and then ongoing for the production setup if we go to contract. And then we've got this in technical as well, but the support is so important, and I think that's something that a lot of times gets missed on the initial conversations of what kind of support do you have? BlackRock's a global company. We have global user base. We would need global support. Can we just email you? Can we call someone? Who should we call? Who are the people that are available to us, etc. The third section is backtesting. Now, I know whenever I talk to a vendor, I always say, look, we want to do our own backtesting, especially because in active equities in BlackRock, we have both our quant side, our systematic team, and our fundamental team. However, having said that, it's always helpful to know that the vendor has done backtesting, just to show us that the person who's selling us this data has really looked at the data themselves as well and are seeing alpha in the data to some extent. So it's really good to see what kind of backtesting the data vendor has done, and also it gives us an idea of where we need to go with our backtesting as well. The methodology is incredibly important. We have to really understand how the data was captured, not only to make sure that certain standards are followed, etc., but also to see what sort of time lags to expect. So sometimes data is captured 2 or 3 days post the event that happens that the data refers to. Sometimes the data is captured at the same time, but we wouldn't be getting it until a week or 2 weeks afterwards. So we really need to know that, because then we can figure out how we can use the data, what time horizons of our data decisions can we use this data for. And then, of course, there's the data itself. Now, to me, this is like the most important part, and this is definitely the questions I ask to every single data vendor. So a lot of times, what's your regional coverage? What sort of sector coverage do you have? Do you map the data to tickers? If not, do you map the data to companies? If you have brands, do you map them to companies? Do you map companies to parent companies? Things like that. All of this gives me a really good idea of not only the data, but who I need to talk to internally at BlackRock, which teams would be interested. I'm not going to talk to our European equity team for a data set that covers Brazilian online shopping, because I know that that data set and the portfolio of the European team are just not going to match. At the same time, it could be something that covers a sector like, say, oil, and we'll have lots of different teams in different regions that cover oil, and it would be important regardless of what region that data set covers. So all of this gives us a very holistic picture of what we are going to be talking about, what we're going to be testing, and what the vendor is trying to sell us. And this is something I've used continually. I send this out to vendors pretty much as soon as I start talking to them. And I think, so, you know, if some of the vendors I've talked to are on this call, they know full well what this data vendor tear sheet looks like. So I just wanted to go through my personal experience. It very much echoes Norm's experience with the time saved. Previous to having this, having the data vendor tear sheet, first of all, we would have either a cold call from myself because I've been on a website, or you know, I've met someone at a vendor conference or a broker conference, or one of our investors has found a vendor and they want us to go talk to the vendor. And then we'd have to go back to the vendor and say, okay, what's your pitch deck? Can you send us your pitch deck? We'd get the pitch deck, we'd go through that. We'd most probably do a 30-minute presentation where the vendor would give us the information or the sales pitch for the data. We'd go through it, then we'd have another half an hour conversation. I think I take a little bit longer than Norm to get through all this, but we have another half an hour or so conversation going through a lot of the metadata for the data product. And then after that, we would then set up a meeting with not just myself and the vendor, but also our investors to have them look at the data as well. With the tear sheet, I don't have to do 80%, 90% of that interaction. Yes, I would love to have the pitch deck still. And yes, I would still have a quick call with the vendor to discuss logistics and just to get an idea of who I'm working with. But after that, I don't need to have a separate pitch session to the investors because I can just send the investors the vendor tear sheet. I don't need to have a separate half an hour call about the metadata of the data because I have the spreadsheet, I have the tear sheet, I have the data dictionary, I have any other documentation that the vendor sees fit to send me to support their data. You know, some vendors have been on top of the game. They have been sending their own versions of tear sheets through. Some of the data brokers have developed some spreadsheets, but the problem is, and it's the same with any nascent or emerging technology or space, right? Everyone is developing standards and everyone's is slightly different. So as the consumer of this information, I always have to put different hats on to try and find the same information. And sometimes people don't think that that information is as pertinent as a data buyer would. So having this standard tear sheet with standard sections really allows me to just know, okay, I'm getting this tear sheet. I know exactly where to look to get which answer I need. And very much like Norm said, just by the numbers, I will speak to around 20 vendors a month. Each vendor will take about, an hour to an hour and a half. So that's about 20 to 30 hours a month that I'm saving. which allows me to go talk to more vendors, which allows me to do better trial preparation and trial development with our investors, and really allows me to concentrate on the data sets that we really are interested in and want to move forward with. Obviously, you know, like we said in previous slides, and like Norm said, we've got a lot more standards coming out. There's a lot more items that we have to tackle, and you know, this is an emerging area. So we will, you know, we will always be looking at how to make it a better environment and a better equation for everyone involved. But I think that this particular item just saves so much time and so much effort, and just oils the wheels to an extent that is a really, really great first step. I'll hand over back to Liz now.
Terrific. Thank you, Shruti. It's really helpful to understand the holistic approach and the practical side of using the tear sheet, let's say, in production, and how it's helping you remove 80 to 90% of the friction in your data buying process. Essentially, the standards are helping equip data buyers, such as yourself, to be an internal advocate, right? And remove a lot of those painful steps. Okay, we've got some audience questions rolling in. We have time for one now. Shruti, what have you found the hardest part to deal with in trying to implement the vendor tear sheet?
So the hardest part is, like I said, some people already have some form of documentation that they already have, and they're just like, well, I can just send you this. And again, sometimes it's 30 slides deep in a slide deck, which really doesn't save me time because I still have to go through all of that. Sometimes it's 10 different documents that provide all of this different information. So it's really hard to get those people that have started on this journey to just complete it and move over to the standardized tear sheet. The other thing I found is also just an understanding, and that's something that the FISD team have really worked on. You know, if you go on the website, if you go on the portal, there's a lot of information around the whole data selling, data buying process, and how the tear sheet can help and what all of the different pieces mean. And it's going to take a second, especially because a lot of the vendors that are in the space are not going to necessarily be financial vendors, you know, because the whole point is we're looking at non-finance specific data. So there is a little bit of a learning curve. But overall, what I've seen is everyone's willing to listen and learn and move towards a more standardized environment because, of course, it helps everyone.
Terrific. Thank you, Shruti. It's really important to have an educational aspect to rolling the standards out. And it sounds like you've handled that really well in bringing your vendors along. Okay, thank you. We'll now open up the final segment of the webinar, which is the Data Vendor Panel of Experts. And while the panel gets ready, let's move to our last poll. And this time I'll call upon the data vendors in the audience to answer. Okay, data vendors, for clients that have ended up buying your service, how long does it usually take from first meeting to production? Is it 1 to 3, 3 to 6, 6 to 12, or longer than 12 months? 3 to 6 months, so not surprising, it's the same as the data buyers. And I gotta say, as an industry, we're improving, so terrific. With that, let's turn over to our panel. We'll now hear from a panel of leaders who are representing 4 very different types of firms. Michael Beal, Managing Member of Data Capital Management, a research advisory and wealth management firm. We have Dave Pope, Managing Director of Quantamental Research at S&P Global Intelligence. Ednaldo Silva, CEO of Royalty Stat, a brand new FISD member, and also his firm is brand new to finance. And Sarah McKenna, CEO of Sequentum, a web data collection firm. The panel will be moderated by the terrific Michael Beal. And to get us started, Michael, as the moderator of the panel, I'm sure you'd like to jump right in and talk with your panelists to learn about their adoption of the standards. Before you do so, I know the audience would love to hear how your firm and clients are benefiting from the standards work. Could you share that with us?
Sure, absolutely, and thanks for including me in this today. Now, for us, well, first, we service family offices and individuals who want access to sophisticated investment portfolios, but may not necessarily have the investable capital to allocate to many of our co-members on this FISD working group. And in particular, we are really focused around this idea since our inception of artificial intelligence and an incredible focus on automation. And Norman addressed me about 6 to 8 months ago about trying to help speed this up, and was very excited by that. So we're very focused on automation, and what I saw was that the process of speaking to vendors was very much focused on case studies, which force us to replicate their work and have our conversations around why we can't match their back tests. And I really loved this idea of turning it to be more focused on the data structure and having everything be machine readable, such that it would make it much more easy for us to run it through our processes and have our conversations less be about why we can't get to their exact numbers and more be about those insights, thereby really speeding up the entire time flow. So I think for anybody who's heard me speak, I've always been obsessed with this automation, data economy, railroad tracks, and these standards at the very initial basis, I think really will increase the amount of productivity and move our time over to things that are actually adding value as opposed to just trying to check other people's work.
Thank you, Michael. Really important to hear about automation and machine readable standards, which are embedded, right, kind of undergirding how the standards are being developed. So thank you for sharing that point. I'll now turn it over to you to explore the impact of the standards with your panelists.
Well, that's great. So yeah, we absolutely have a great set of panelists here. And so Dave, why don't we start with you? Clearly S&P is a large accomplished provider that has many financial data products, and I'm sure most of us use you in one way or the other. What was it about the FISD and the work that we're doing here that really made you excited about working with us? And I see you have a lot of thought leadership around the COVID crisis, and would be very interested to see how the work we're doing here has enabled people to act faster on time-sensitive requests.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm a member of the data marketplace effort within S&P. So what that means, I lead the quantitative research and alternative data scouting. Prior to joining S&P, I spent about 18 years on the buy side, most recently at Wellington. So I have perspectives on both sides of the data conversation. I'd like to say a few words about how S&P has adopted these standards. S&P's data marketplace brings together core and alternative data linked and supported with code augmented by relevant research and backtest. A few examples of content featured on the marketplace include foot traffic, FDA Orange Book and FAIRs, and numerous unstructured data sets. These are all really important, especially now as decision makers are facing an information gap and are starving for real-time, granular, on-the-ground types of information to provide them insights as to what's actually happening. You can find the complete listing of all of our data sets on marketplace.spglobal.com. Attendees will notice that virtually all of the information listed in the tier sheet can be found under each data tile on the site. As Shruti mentioned, many vendors are not equipped or even able to provide this information in organized ways. So it's a lot of work, it's a big lift, and that's what we are doing at S&P to make the data more presentable to our clients. A foundational principle of marketplace is to lift the burden on clients. During a crisis, easing that lift for clients becomes that much more valuable. I think that data standards are very important because they reinforce best practices and facilitate communication. The marketplace performs data vendor tear sheet tests, which are incredibly time consuming for those searching for alpha. I think it makes sense for a large centralized player to do this work once, as opposed to each of our clients having to repeat the same task on their side. This is not their core business. This is not their core competency. This frees clients time to harvest the alpha. On the marketplace platform, we address the tear sheet items. I'll cover a few. These are a big deal for us. The first is curation. So we find that about 5% of the data that we evaluate really is interesting. The selection of data sets that complement each other, reinforces each other, and we need a critical mass. This is all important. So we're searching for best-in-class data. There's a detailed analysis of quality. We have a quantitative team that I oversee that conducts a quality review just like our clients do. So we look for missing data, outliers, counts through time, things like this. We then develop specific use cases for each client persona. We examine collection policies. We have a strict policy against PII, inappropriate web scraping. All of the data is linked. This is really important because we live in a world of these islands of data that need to be bridged, and linking bridges that those islands. The linking can be by security identifier, any relationship that's important to the analyst, a professional ID, GPS location. We perform back tests. We document that back test. We even provide code snippets to our clients so that they don't need to worry about reproducing our results. We look at delivery, so service level agreements. We're agnostic to the delivery platform, FTP, cloud, API. One area that's really surprising to me is that clients have expressed appreciation in a single point of contracting. So rather than dealing with a variety of vendors, coming to one place to deal with the uniform terms and language that they're already familiar with. So I just say by satisfying the tear sheet requirements and even going beyond, trials are accelerated, clients are able to complete more evaluations. We believe this is best for both sides.
That's great. I really appreciate that. And certainly your role as such a large player is important to driving those standards, as well as you being both on the almost the buy and the sell side here. So thank you very much. So, you know, as we move forward, I'd like to introduce to Ednaldo of RoyaltyStat. And, you know, you're a very recent member of the FISD and appreciate you joining this effort, as well as just starting to sell to the financial services industry as a whole. So very interested if you could share some of your experience so far selling to the financial services industry and how you believe that these standard efforts will really help you avoid mistakes that others may have already made.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate being invited to this webinar. Well, RoyaltyStat is a database of royalty rates. We were the first to market. We came online in December of 1999. We believe we are the best in class. It took about 9 years for a competitor to come into the market. The features that are interesting for me, being part of FISD, is that it has brought a series of attributes that I think will enhance the customer relationship that we have been developing. We have historically been concerned with the quality of data extraction, because we have been navigating two different cultures. One culture of commoditizing attributes or data, and we have veered towards a bespoke data that is curated as opposed to commoditizing. So all of efforts that we have developed have been in this area. And what has happened recently with our engagement is that, yes, we have the appreciation of the tear sheet and the data dictionary, but I think what is really crucial and discerning is the concern with mapping the data. We did not have this concern mapping before. We are a data set in which the key identifiers are entities and not instruments. So we have, and historically, we have had CIK as our major entity identifier, and we have also developed the JV key from Standard & Poor's as another identifier. But certainly, the concern with mapping is a learning experience. We have recently, actually our first client in your space, in this financial space, brought to our attention, the legal entity identifier, LEI. We were not familiar with this identifier before. So in summary, mapping has been an important development for us. And the second one is a user case. When we came to market, we were trying to solve a problem that existed in corporate tax transaction between related parties, for which there was no data to support related party transactions. So the user case was already in place.
Makes sense. Well, Ednaldo, as you look at that, I think that what's really interesting and really appreciate that was, that lesson, and that's what we really hope is that we're adding benefit to all the new vendors. When you mentioned that you weren't aware of the way we think about taxonomies, and that should very quickly, teach everybody, particularly those with new data sets that we haven't looked at before, how we look at the world. So I think that that's a really great example. So as we move over to the amazing Sarah McKenna and the work that she's doing at Sequentum, I think many people are familiar with her, on web scraping. Sarah, you've really played an amazing role, not only with the general data standards, but then also on the web scraping standards. And I hear that you are, really integrating those standards into your web data collection platform. Would you mind spending a bit of time and tell us, what is it that you envision to really drive out of the standards, and why have you taken such a leadership role in this effort?
Thank you so much for that great intro, Michael. So Sequentum, as you may know, automates 95% of the work required to, source and structure, format, and deliver data. We work with all kinds of data, web, file, database, API, and our platform is something that we license or use when we supply data subscription services. So for us, Sequentum is in a very unique position as being at the nexus between the data vendor and the data buyer. So the standards really present to us a huge opportunity to reduce scope, reduce risk, and just echoing what everyone else has said, to really drive efficiencies and speed up the the data buying process in this brand new industry. And we are really uniquely positioned to help. And we're not the only vendor with a platform. I'm sure many other web data collection platform providers are doing the same. But what we're able to do, because we have this end-to-end automation platform, is to do things like help automate the creation of the vendor tear sheet. So we can do things like, data dictionary. That's something that comes standard. All the feeds have a data dictionary already documented, built in. Quality monitoring, right? That's just a component in our system. It's very easy for us to add that to a vendor tear sheet and to documentation about how the quality of a feed is being monitored over time. Version history, same thing. We track all the changes to any feed, and we can easily produce reports on that and provide templates to our customers to help speed the adoption of these terrific standards. Things like how is a particular feed mapped to the various indexes, easily documented, et cetera, et cetera. An audit trail, what output formats is available in, what delivery mechanisms. Even for back testing, this is something that can be additional agent running on the platform automatically producing the back testing and the documentation of the back testing over time as the data evolves, right? These are all things that can be standardized and automated, templates provided and curated and improved over time. You mentioned, Michael, that we're working on web data collection considerations. Really, really excited about that effort. The goal is to separate good actors from bad actors when it comes to web scraping and collecting data from public internet sites. I think that's going to help the industry at large. Obviously, it's going to help Sequentum, but to really separate between good and bad actors. So we're really, really excited to be participating in that. And of course, we're building all of the checks and controls and governance mechanisms into our platform to report on that. And the vendor tear sheet right now has been conceived as a standard documentation set for every data offering. And you know, there's very clear ways to make it machine readable, which we can do. And we'll just be continuing to evolve that over the time. So super excited to be involved. Really, really pleased with this FISD effort, and excited to hear feedback and to continuously collaborate over time with folks in the industry at large.
That's amazing. And, you know, Dave, Ednaldo, and Sarah, really appreciate all of your efforts in joining this. Personally, it's enabled us to cut down our time spent on data by about 50%, and really look forward to where this all goes from here. So with that, I will pass it back over to you, Liz.
Thank you, Michael, and panelists. Really excellent insights, and we can see from your collective experiences, your collective wisdom, the benefit of you know, coming together and fostering innovation to get the data to flow. So terrific to hear from you all. Thank you. We have a few minutes remaining, so why don't we turn over to some of these terrific questions coming in from the audience. Let's take a question here about COVID-19. Norman, you had mentioned that COVID-19 is accelerating adoption cycles. Well, could you elaborate on this a bit for us?
Yeah, I'm dreading the day when COVID goes away, not just because I have to share the beach with other people, but because it's really driven the interest in alternative data from the various different investment professionals that we work with. And it's always been the case of alternative data providing a sort of company insights on a frequency and granularity that you just wouldn't be able to get from anywhere else. And COVID's really kind of brought out the need for that, and that to me has really accelerated the adoption of even data sets that we've been having for a long time, that we've been seeing very broad-based interest from within our user base. So that's been really good for us.
What I would just add to that is that what I have always found about what takes the longest part of this cycle of you know, going from initial meeting to actually buying to implementation is really the need and the urgency. There's a lot of data set vendors out there, and they can all add value. So how do you prioritize? And I think what we've really seen here is just this sense of urgency of really needing an answer to this problem, needing new insights, really seeing the gaps that we have from our existing data sets, and instead of just having a general, I want to have alternative data, saying I have a problem that I need to fill and we need to move forward on that. And the general level of being okay with having slow cycle times and having it go back and forth and the likes, that is not acceptable right now, as our clients are really looking for us to solve the problem as soon as possible. And so that comes, that really highlights this sense of urgency. When you really need to get it done, how can you make it as efficient as possible? And like all things, never let a good crisis go to waste. And in this case, the need to solve a pain point fast and efficiently, I think is very helpful to the general adoption, albeit it comes with a cost to us all personally and as a society.
Thank you, Michael. And it's just amazing the genius of the people in the industry who have really just brought so many innovative insights and data sets to the fore to help us understand what's really happening. I would like to now bring up this question on vendor backtesting. Okay, so how do you determine the vendor backtesting was done appropriately versus filling in a box? Shruti, why don't you share your views on that?
Sure. So with backtesting, like with any testing, at least at BlackRock, we like to do our own anyway. But what the vendor backtesting question on the tear sheet asks, and hopefully answers to an extent, is not so much what exactly did you do, what standards did you use, just how much data did you use, all of that, which is all obviously helpful, but do you know your data that you're trying to sell to us? And the questions around backtesting are not just yes or no, but it's also around, well, can you put your results? Do you have a use case that you tested? Can you attach your results? So there is a level of depth that we do ask for. And most people who've done backtesting do have some sort of white paper or a use case that they can define with details of their findings. But really, it's also about, like I said, fundamentally, at least for me, it's about, do you know your data that you're selling to us? Have you looked at it to see if there's alpha possibilities for finance institutions in your data? Or are you just saying, hey, I have this data, this is a hot area right now, let me just chance it? Because it makes it easier for me and the investors who are going to test the data and hopefully use it to really get to the bottom of what the data is, and also give us a direction of, especially if it's a very brand new data set or data product in our industry, gives us an idea of where to look for the alpha as well.
Very good. Thank you, Shruti. And it really, what I hear you saying is it's really important for the data vendors to know what they've got. And backtesting is a way to prove that out. So thank you for sharing that view. And it looks like we're at the top of the hour. I am going to hand it over to Tracy Shumpert to close us out. I want to thank all of our panelists for their fantastic input today. Tracy, we do have a question about FISD Alt Data certification for vendors. Could you address that and then bring us home? Thanks so much, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much to all of the panelists. I'll just briefly say, so it's funny because we keep getting this request that vendors would like to sort of certify their compliance with the standards. So this is something that FISD is considering, and I'm not going to get into much detail because it's so early, but if anyone is interested in getting certified or us having helping FISD come up with a certification process, please email me. This is incredibly early stages, but we're interested in responding to whatever the industry needs. So even beyond certification, if there are other things that would be helpful, if there were an industry answer for, FISD and the Alternative Data Council would be thrilled to help. So thanks, Liz. So just moving on quickly, this was the first in a series of upcoming webinars. This is our upcoming calendar. I particularly want to point to our webinar on May 19th. If you enjoyed this, we'll have another webinar on managing the risks of alternative data, which will focus on the compliance due diligence questionnaire that the Alternative Data Council has also put together. So hopefully you can join us for that. If you liked this webinar or didn't like it or want to provide feedback, we would be thrilled to get it, and you will be getting a survey shortly in addition to the recorded version of this webinar. So folks who couldn't join will be able to get it later. Again, I just wish to thank our sponsors, Google Cloud, Refinitiv, AWS Financial Services, SIBO, S&P Global Market Intelligence, Tradition Data, and Exignite. And I just want to wish everyone a great day. Thank you so much for joining the first webinar in this series, and we look forward to hearing from you on future webinars and hopefully in the Alternative Data Council. Take care, everybody, and talk again soon. Bye-bye.